Hey, everybody. Great to see all y'all out there. And well, we're talking about true crime today in general. And of course, we are talking about the controversial and fun new topic of what? The Amityville murders. Yes. Welcome, everybody. Hey, I'm super excited to be here today. I got a great guest for you guys. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot today. And hey, we're talking about new crimes. Isn't that amazing? So, listen, guys, the long nightmare is over. And what am I referring to? Well, we're in the golden age. We are in the golden age, guys, of true crime research, as you all know. It's never been more fun and actually more important to be doing the work that our guest today, Rob Levinson, is doing. And of course, we are talking about the long nightmare of satanic panic and the shadow it cast over the true crime community up until, well, this past year or so when a new zeitgeist has formed. And that new zeitgeist is getting to the heart of the matter and finally telling the truth about these cases. Now, all of you all out there and watching mainly know me as a Son of Sam guy. And those of you who've been with me for the last 2 years know what we did in Son of Sam. Well, we started out as acolytes of conspiracy theories. I was once, yes, a believer in the ridiculous notion of cult involvement in Son of Sam. And of course, y'all know over the 2 years how that narrative arc has shifted. And I have become the biggest critic out there, not only of Maury Terry's ridiculous cult theory, but also of the whole notion of mixing conspiracy and true crime. In my opinion, the two don't belong together. And so that, of course, makes me even doubly excited to interview our wonderful guest today, Rob Levinson. Well, before we get to Rob, of course, I just want to say why I'm here talking about Amityville. Well, you all know me as the Son of Sam guy. And after we retired from that subject, a lot of you emailed me saying, Manny, look for another case. Look for another case. We do more crimes. And I gave it a lot of thought. And I realized that, yes, I still have more to say in the true crime space. And the fact is, though, I consider myself a big crime guy. And what are these big crimes? Well, Jack the Ripper is one of them. Manson's one of them. Zodiac is one of them. Son of Sam, of course. And in my opinion, the one that rounds out those top five, possibly even at number one on the list, is the Amityville murderers. Yes. And there's lots of theories going around, lots of people out there. And just like in Son of Sam, there's a lot of contention and a lot of anger that happens between people in this community. So one of the things we want to do today is really take it back down to reality and get a story from a very interesting man about what he thinks and what the evidence shows, which is much more important as to what actually happened in Son of Sam. So I consider our guest today a kindred spirit in the true crime community, and I'm very excited to have him here. Well, who is he? Well, our guest today, Rob Levinson, is one of the principals of Out of Time Productions, an independent film company that produces, well, films on all sorts of topics that Rob is interested in. And for the last year, Rob has taken on this subject of the Amityville horror. Eschewing conspiracy and the paranormal, Rob instead decided to do, well, what we did in Son of Sam. Go to the actual sources themselves, the police files, which ultimately are the only things that are going to help researchers. I always say, get yourselves out of the books and get yourselves out of the newspaper articles. All you're doing when you research from newspaper articles and books is repeating what someone else said and what someone else interpreted. I actually call it the circle jerk, as you all know. So in that regard, I'm super duper excited to, well, introduce this man to our airwaves for the first time and also to tell us the story of Amityville. So without further ado, may I introduce to you the one, Moet. I think you want to get ready for this one. The only Rob Levinson. There he
Hey,
is. Hey,
hey,
Rob.
look. I'm wearing the shades to imitate you on your poster. You know, your poster
Oh,
art for
cool.
the show. So this is in this is in your honor for you and your fans.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, the only thing that would have rounded it out was the dashiki, but I don't think you. Where actually?
Uh,
Where are you? Where are you located, Rob? Where are you
right
based out of?
now, I'm in an undisclosed room. Right now, it's not a psych ward. I can promise you that. But
Uh-huh.
I'm in the Northeast
Cool.
of the United
So it's
States.
really great to have you here. And I'm so excited that we're going to have this discussion today because, as I told the audience, I really think that I have a lot of respect for what you did. And of course, we'll talk about your movie and we'll show the trailer a bit later. And my mods will link to all of your sites for us a little bit later. But I'm super excited to have this discussion, not only because I'm interested in the topic of, conspiracy and true crime and mixing it, but also I'm super duper interested in the Amityville story. I call it the Amityville horror. You see how programmed I am by society, Rob? Um,
Yeah, well, it was a horror. So.
right, exactly. But it seemed to be a true horror rather than, of course, the paranormal that later came out. But as my audience has come to expect from me, I like to treat these subjects, even though this is one of the big cases, I like to treat these subjects as if the audience is coming at it for the first time. So what I've done is I have a bunch of pictures which I'm going to queue up whenever you are ready or talking about things. But I'd like you to basically, before we get into the story of what happened and the various theories of what happened and all of that stuff, I think it behooves us to just introduce the cast of characters. Who are the players in the Amityville story, Rob?
Well, we have the star, I guess. The infamous Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. We have his father, Big Ronnie, as he was referred to, and that is Ronald DeFeo Sr. We have Louise DeFeo, the wife and mother.
Okay.
We also have the eldest daughter, and that would be Dawn DeFeo.
Dawn DeFeo, right? And this is, well, we have a picture of Dawn with another one of the daughters
Her
as well.
sister Allison, her younger sister Allison. These pictures that are popping up are the famous oil paintings that hung on the wall in the DeFeo home. That's John and Mark.
Right.
John Matthew and Mark. They're the brothers, younger brothers of Ronald. And that would be the family that lived at 112 Ocean Avenue. That's I believe that's Rocco.
Yeah, this is Michael Brigante, who was the who actually
is it Michael Brigante, or does it say Rocco?
No, this is Michael. This is the father of Louise, who is an interesting character in and of himself, and somebody that I'm a storyline that I'm interested in this saga, which is of course hints of mafia connections and all that kind of stuff as well, which is something that I'm interested in as a New Yorker here. But of course, one of the main characters in this story is the house itself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this house?
Okay. Well, this house is, as all the Amityville fans know, it's located on Ocean Avenue in Amityville. The number at the time, the address at the time of the murders was 112 Ocean Avenue.
Right.
It was later changed to 108 to hopefully prevent.
Right. Hey, Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're having some audio issues, unfortunately. It's not cutting in and out, but the volume is going up and down.
Oh.
So I don't know exactly how to fix that. Maybe either bring things a little closer or speak a little louder. I'm very sorry. As you know, we were having some audio
Okay. How's
problems.
this?
Much better.
Okay, I'll try to sit as close as I can to the phone. Yeah, so in the following years, the home address was changed to 108 to prevent onlookers from finding the house, which, there were so many photographs of it available. I mean, before the internet, there were books published, so newspaper articles. So people found the house, I think, fairly simple. Now with the internet, you can find everything as far as locations go. So yes, that's the house. It's still there now. It looks much different though.
Well, it's funny that you mention it because in Son of Sam they did the same thing. David Berkowitz lived in in a building called 35 Pine Street, and what they did was they changed it to 42 Pine Street after the after the arrest. And I guess in those days it worked before the internet, but it
Right.
seems like kind of a ridiculous thing to do now in 2022.
Well, there are so many true crime people out there, especially on YouTube, like yourself, who have shows or just they go out on a whim and they'll have their camera with them and they'll be driving down the street to where these houses are and they'll try to you know get close to the property as they can without being intrusive. Um,
Right. One of
Everyone's a
my
YouTuber nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, tell me about it. One of my members of the audience told me that the house is actually up for sale again.
Yes, I see that it went up, I think, about a week ago.
Yeah, and
So that's interesting.
what flipped me out about it was how cheap it was. It's only going for like $850,000, which to me seems like
Mm,
a steal for this house. And I
yeah.
just wonder whether it still has some stain on it that people will just not pay, market value for it, or if that is market value, well, that brings up a whole other issue of the housing bubble and things that we're not going to get into today. But one thing I was actually curious about, and it kind of speaks to the protagonist of your movie, which we'll get into later, is this sign here, um, the High Hope sign. What was the story behind that?
Yeah, I might not have all of the facts about things, but the High Hope sign that was something that was erected by the DeFeos when they moved in. They purchased the house back in 1965, and
Okay.
they lived in a very cramped Brooklyn apartment. So getting out onto Long Island to this wonderful large home was quite the accomplishment. Even though the home, I believe, was purchased by Louise DeFeo's father, Mr.
Right.
Brigante. So that obviously was a big help for them making the migration to Long Island. But yes, so they put up the sign, High Hopes, which, it speaks for itself. They had high hopes, a new beginning, fresh start, so that's my interpretation, at least, of what the sign meant to them.
Right, and just getting back to Michael Brigante for a second, I find this person extremely interesting because, listen, the fact is I knew nothing about Amityville really until just about a year or so ago when I started watching various documentaries about it. Of course, everybody out there and their mother knows about the Amityville horror, the movies, the paranormal stuff, which we'll get into in a little while. But I never knew there was this Brooklyn connection, that there was this New York City connection to the story. Not only in the fact that the DeFeos moved from Brooklyn, but that this Michael Brigante, who owned this car dealership in Brooklyn. Now, do you know anything about this guy? Is he a known entity? Like, what do we know about Michael Brigante?
I guess he was sort of somewhat in the shadows. He wasn't, from what I know, he wasn't a made guy with any of the crime families.
Hmm.
Um, he was an associate, maybe, of some real mafiosa, with the Gambino crime family in particular.
Hmm.
Uh, so he was just an associate, as far as I know. He knew Carlo Gambino. Uh, there's speculation on behalf of Ronald Butch DeFeo saying that the auto shop was more of a front, that the mafia was using that to dispose of anything from human remains to funneling money
Right.
through the business. I don't know. I don't know how much evidence was ever there to support what Butch was saying. Uh, but I wouldn't doubt that there was an association. He was a businessman, the mafia in the 1970s. Uh, they were pretty they were pretty involved with business owners. It was a way for them to make money, easy money. So I
Right.
wouldn't be surprised. I would not be
Yeah. In
shocked.
fact, in fact, I think personally, and this isn't a suggestion to you, but this is a suggestion to people who are very interested in the real aspects of this story. I think that there's a rich vein of research to be done about Michael Brigante, his car dealership, what the deal was there with bringing in these partners, because it wasn't always Brigante Buick, it was Brigante Carl Buick or Brigante other name
Right.
Buick. So
Mhm.
in my opinion, there's like an almost an untapped vein of research to be done here, and I'm trying to convince a few people out there to start looking into that aspect. But how'd you come to the story in the first place as a filmmaker and as a storyteller? What drew you to this story?
Well, growing up, I was a kid in the 70s and 80s and big into horror films, loved being scared, watching these films. And Amityville was, one of those movies that were on top of everyone's list. So I was a little too young to catch it in the movie theater, but on cable a couple of years later, I'd watch it, kind of with your hands in front of your eyes,
Yeah.
and then it became one of those movies that every Halloween you have a sleepover with your friends and you pop in the VCR these movies, and Amityville was surely one of those. So so as a kid, I enjoyed the original film, and then when I became a writer in my 30s, and always would think about the Amityville story from time to time, but never really thought of writing a story about it. It wasn't until I would say maybe, I don't know, less than 10 years ago when
Hmm.
I was thinking, if I was to write a story, what could it be? Would it just be on the heels of the paranormal side of the story? And would that even be something worth seeing because of all the sequels that have been made? And we've
Right.
already, it seems like Hollywood and smaller films already covered all of that. So a couple of years ago, I just said, why not just tell the real story, the story that can't really be refuted, and that's the trial, that's the investigation. Those are facts that happened. Obviously, the man was arrested, he was charged, he went to trial, he was convicted. Um, so
Right.
you have that, but now what about all the other facts that led up to those things going into play? So there's an investigation. So I figured it would be pretty interesting to show that perspective. What went into making sure that they cross their T's, right, and dot their I's. To make sure that this conviction happened, that he wasn't found, not guilty by reason of insanity. There's so many facets that go into creating a successful prosecution. So
Right.
why not tell it from the perspective of the prosecutor,
Right, and
which
I want to get into that a little later,
Mhm.
where I want to talk a lot about your
Yeah,
movie and the proof of concept and what led you to that. But I'm still interested in the story itself, and you just said
sure.
something that really resonated with me because in my work of Son of Sam, like I told the audience in the beginning, I came to the Son of Sam story as a true believer in the conspiracy angle, which of course I don't know how familiar you are with that story,
Mhm.
but the conspiracy angle of Son of Sam was that he was involved with a whole cult of people, 22 people, and then it was a nationwide thing. And I truly believed this for many years of my life. And then when I started to read the police reports, read Berkowitz's confession, read his own thousands and thousands of letters that he wrote to his psychiatrist and other people out there, a new picture emerged for me, which actually maybe this spoke to you as well. It seemed much more interesting than the, not only was it true, but it seemed a hell of a lot more interesting than the conspiracy angles as well.
Well, I think here with in the Amityville case, you have the conspiracy theory that the house is haunted, right?
Right.
So it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, this is a hook to get people.
Right.
Whether it's selling a book or pitching a movie. Um, it really. And you got to remember, this was the 70s. This was way before people were really truly informed. If something wasn't happening in your neighborhood, you might not realize what was happening 3 states away from you.
Right.
So we're so far more well aware of things now over the last couple of decades than we ever were in our history of mankind. So I
Exactly.
really I really believe that these allegations of paranormal activity and the involvement, a year or so after the Lutz family left, when you had the Warrens, who are very popular, even now, even past their lifespan, have become even more popular with The Conjuring and other investigations that they've done. So
Now,
they
for the
were
audience's
at the
sake, who were the Warrens? Just because remember, we know nothing out here.
Sure.
There's another character you've introduced to the story.
Right, right. Well, the Warrens aren't in my story, but they are in the Amityville story for sure.
Hmm.
And Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were paranormal investigators, and I believe Ed was a proclaimed, like, he had some religious aspect to this, where he could, I guess, sense whether or not it was demonic in nature, whatever the force was,
Hmm.
so they were at the home. This was 1976, and they were there with reporters from the local news, and there were other paranormal psychic people there as well. I believe, I don't remember their names, but there was sort of like a seance there where they tried to see where if they could connect with any of the evil forces that presumably were in the house that may have contributed to the murders of the DeFeo family, and of course, scared the hell out of the Lutz family. So they
Right.
vacated 28 days after moving in.
Well, I
So
want to.
it
I'm sorry.
really, it really, as a young person growing up in that time frame, you tend to believe what you see on TV, no matter what, right? If it says true story before the movie starts, as a young person, or even someone who's not so young, they might say, well, this is the true story. I believe it.
I got to tell you, I'm a smart person. At least I consider myself a smart person. But I actually, when I was a kid and teenager, because like you, I grew up in the 80s more than the 70s. Born in 73, so by the time the 80s came around, I was fully conscious. I actually believed this stuff, and you're right. When it says a true story, it's amazing what that does to hypnotize the mind of man. I mean, it's crazy. And of course, Jay Anson himself, in a quote, said, "Hey, I don't know whether it was true or not. The people who told me this believed it, so I'm just reporting what I said." So, for the sake of the audience, what started this paranormal uh, business with Amityville, and who were these people that we're showing right here?
You know, um, I know probably as much about the Lutz family as the average, Amityville enthusiast. I didn't go out of my way to study who they were. I know
Right.
that they were this was a second marriage, I believe, for both. I don't know. George could have been married more than once before. I don't know for sure. But anyhow, they were newly married, and Kathy Lutz had 3 children, and George, presumably, I guess he adopted them. They changed their last name to Lutz. They purchased this house at a very low price of $80,000. Which, considering the size of the home, the location, it's right on the Amityville River over there, so it's this beautiful Dutch colonial home, and it's even in 1975, it was still considered a steal, right? 80,000 for a big
Right.
house. So they move in there, and I guess immediately they start sensing things that are off. Temperature changes. It would get very cold. That's this. I think that these are more of what George Lutz relayed in interviews, that he felt cold all the time. Doors would close on their own. The boathouse, the doors would open and close on their own, and and then flies. A lot of flies in the house in the month of
Right.
December, which is a little bit unusual. So they all attested to that. That there were flies on the window, hundreds and hundreds of flies. So, and then there were other things. You could watch. There's a wonderful interview with George and Kathy Lutz from 1979 when they were promoting the Amityville Horror, where they're on
Hmm.
Good Morning America, and David Hartman was the host of the show back then, and you could tell he doesn't put much faith or value into anything they're saying. But when
Right.
you watch, what I will say, I will give credit to George and Kathy, and I don't want to insult them. I know there are many people out there that believe them 100%, but they're very believable. If you watch them be interviewed, in that interview, they're very calm, they're very laid back, they speak very matter of factly. But you got to remember, they've also had a few years of, preparing, prepping, being able to
Right.
ask, being able to answer rather, tough questions, questions that come across as silly. I mean, George, in that interview, I recall him saying that he would see some red flashing eyes in the upstairs window. I mean, the
Yeah.
things that he saw Kathy levitate, he saw Kathy age like, into an old woman. And these things were depicted in the film.
Right.
But it's funny because he says that the film embellished things. I think like the ectoplasma on the walls or anything like that, which
Right.
really wasn't that. I mean, he said there was more like gel-like substance found on the stairs that he couldn't explain where it was. Was it organic? Was it a toy the kids made or something?
Right.
But the other things that he does say happened to him are so outlandish. Uh, you know, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Does he really believe this? Is he just one of these fabricators that you just believe your own
Right.
fabrications?
Exactly. I mean, that's the ultimate question that I deal with in Son of Sam with the author Maury Terry, because he clearly, and I've found so many inconsistencies, lies, selective editing, and the question that I have is, did he know this, or did he actually believe his own story? And that's, of course, a whole other thing. But I mean, in retrospect, it's ridiculous that anyone believed this. But the '70s were clearly a different time period in American history, and one thing that is becoming apparent to me as we discuss this is that Son of Sam and Amityville are connected in a sense. I really think that this Amityville, and of course we see here that the Lutzes were portrayed by Brolin and Margot Kidder, in my opinion, a hell of a lot more attractive than the original couple, but that's just my opinion. This was the beginning of what became satanic panic in America, and which found
Yes.
its culmination in the '80s with heavy metal, and then of course Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, comes out, which was, in my opinion, the pinnacle, the absolute ridiculous end result of the satanic panic. This isn't to say that there wasn't satanic cults and there wasn't people who believed in this stuff, but it wasn't like this massive nationwide thing. And I just think Hollywood went to it, and authors made a lot of money from it. And I really think it has cast a serious pall over the true crime community. But before we get into that discussion, I actually want to kind of talk a little bit more about the various stories that came out of this, eventually leading, of course, to your story and what you believe happened. So over the years, of course, we've had this paranormal stuff, and it led to a million sequels and movies. What other theories have come out since then to supplant the paranormal, and what are your various opinions of those?
Um, well, there. I recall in the mid 2000s, the whole Amityville case became a hot topic again. It was dormant, it seemed, for a period of time, and then I believe they divers found a partial remains of a handgun, and somehow
Mm.
that got turned into, well, here's the possible second gun that may have been used or something like that.
Now, where'd
And
they
it was
find this handgun?
it was in the river, in the Amityville River. But it's like, yeah, so what? You know how many people throw guns into rivers? I mean,
Yeah,
all they
exactly.
found. I mean, you could watch. I believe there's videos online, but it was literally a frame of a pistol, like the metal outside of a frame of a pistol. It was so rotted and decomposed. I mean,
There's no way to forensically analyze that. There's
no,
no way to connect it, and also there could be a million people who threw that in there.
Well, yeah, exactly. So to try to link it to, the Amityville, it was just something like to sensationalize the story. It was probably, on those tabloid TVs, it was just a great story to cover, to tie in the two
Well,
things.
why did
And
the
I think that,
notion? Well, why did
yeah,
the notion of a second gun become all of a sudden important? What was the reasoning behind that?
there are some conspiracy theories out there uh, that Louise DeFeo was shot with another gun,
Hmm.
with a handgun. To that effect, that there was another shooter at the house, and I don't know how that came to be. I probably read about it when it first came out, and I just didn't really care about it. I wasn't so into the Amityville story back then, but yeah, and there's just nothing, in my opinion, there's just nothing really there to support any other theory than what was discovered through the examination of the bodies,
Hmm.
uh, the medical examiner's office, what he found when he examined the bodies, the evidence he recovered from the bodies, and there was no other caliber bullet that was discovered during the autopsies. It
And that's
was,
in
I
the
mean,
medical examiner's report.
correct. I mean, unless reports were fabricated back then,
Hmm.
let's say this was a mafia involved type situation. I mean, I'm sure the mafia would not use a high powered rifle to eliminate someone at close range. That's not what they do.
Right.
If there's a hit, it's probably a pistol that they're using, and it's a quick bang, and they're out of there.
Right, and generally speaking, because that is one of the things in researching for this show that I came across the most outlandish stuff that it was a government plot to get rid of the DeFeos, or the neighbors next door decided to all band together and get rid of this evil Italian family that infiltrated their community. But
Yeah.
like what happened in Son of Sam with me, I think that the truth was just much more mundane, much more
Mhm.
easily explainable. That isn't to say there aren't questions, which we can get into a little bit later about. Well, I'll just get into it now about the fact that a person could shoot six people with a rifle and seemingly nobody heard it. That's the main thing with me that kind of bugs me about this story.
Well, let me interject something there. There have been other investigators, people who are very interested in the DeFeo murders, people who went back, a couple of decades later after and interviewed some of the neighbors. And once again, I don't know if there's anything there to substantiate that these conversations took place. If there are names of the neighbors, but supposedly some of the neighbors said they did actually hear gunshots, but they didn't want to tell the police or call the police when it happened because they didn't want to be involved, because they surmised that the DeFeo family might have been involved in some mob behavior, and if this was something, a retaliation against them, they didn't want to be next on the list.
Right,
To
and if you think about it, that's a perfectly reasonable explanation for
plausible,
that. Totally
sure.
plausible. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about true crime and conspiracy. There are often, or most of the time, very plausible, mundane explanations for things that people go on flights of fancy about. So I've heard, yeah, they didn't hear the gunshots because the ectoplasms and the spirits kept the sound in and all this stuff.
Right.
Um, but what was the forensic evidence so you said it was just a single rifle, a single caliber, and no other guns involved at all?
It's a 35 caliber Marlin rifle, and which is a high-powered rifle. Has a very loud bang when it's fired.
Hmm.
You can hear it from several blocks away. I believe when they tested it, they said 3 to 5 blocks away you could hear the echo effect of this weapon. Um, there were several shots fired. There were 2 shots fired into each parent,
Hmm.
and then there was single shots fired into the children. So they recovered all those rounds. Some of the rounds exited the bodies, and they found the spent bullets on the floor or in the wall,
Right.
um, and the rest were recovered from the autopsy.
Right. And, of course, there are probably people out there saying, well, so the medical examiner covered everything up. And, I deal with that all the time where all of a sudden people just will throw out the actual evidence in their face and come up with these wild, outlandish theories just to keep the delusions going in their own head.
Right.
So, in a sense, I've been dealing with these people in Son of Sam for about 2 years now. What's your experience been like with, if any, with people who might have similar sacredly held beliefs about the Amityville story?
Well, I think people who are very into this case, way more so than I am, prior to even beginning, writing a script, I would go on in these chats on YouTube or wherever where they would be talking about it, and I'd offer my opinion, and it would be, basically just related to the crime itself and the evidence, not anything else that can't be substantiated. And then, of course, you get into these spats. I try not to. It's basically, you could stay on YouTube all day and just keep answering people's questions. I haven't, since I've had my proof of concept on YouTube. It's only been 10 days or so, so I haven't
Mhm.
had much negative feedback at all. But I see on other people's Amityville type pages, there's a lot of back and forth because these pages have been in existence for years,
Right.
and you can go on there and pick a fight with anyone.
Right.
But I don't like to do that with people. It's not worth it. There are some people out there who they're just they stick to their guns, and they want to believe everything that George Lutz said or other investigators have said about there being a bigger conspiracy with the DeFeo murders. Hey, everyone's entitled to their opinion, and
Right. Right.
conspiracy theories can be fun.
Oh, tell me
Everyone
about it.
enjoys. Yeah, yeah. It's almost like a game. It's like a board game, or a video game. It's just to hear these possibilities that you never entertained in your mind, and then you start, believing it. You start letting it seep into your consciousness that, yeah, that's a good valid point. I could see that that's a possibility. But
Right.
when it comes to forensic evidence, I look at it from this standpoint. How could all of those investigators, including the medical examiner's office, been part of this giant conspiracy about this family that lived in Long Island, this rambunctious, violent, family? I mean, this isn't the JFK conspiracy here.
Right.
This isn't on that same level. So I
Right. What
think you
would be
have
their motives?
right. Why would they
Right.
want to jeopardize their career because of this family that was unfortunately, brutally murdered? I don't think the mafia that quick. Let's put it this way: the mafia. I mean, granted, the five families were very powerful at one time in New York, and I just don't think they would have had that much control over this massive situation that they could have put their claws into all of these individuals to say, you're going to make the report sound this way and that way, because if not, you're going to wind up with Jimmy Hoffa someday when Hoffa, I don't even know if Hoffa was still alive probably back then, but bad example, but you're going to
No,
wind
it's a
up
great one.
you know what I mean? This
Well,
wasn't organized. And let's just look at the big picture here. Butch DeFeo confessed. Not only did he confess, which whether or not you want to say the police beat him up to confess, he still gave up crucial facts that no one other than the killer or the accomplice would know. He told them where to find the rifle. They found it the very next day in the river, 20 or 30 feet in the water where he said it would be. They recovered the rifle. They found his bloody clothes that he threw into a storm drain in Brooklyn. Okay. He told them exactly which storm drain. You know how many storm drains there are in Brooklyn?
a
The,
lot. Yeah.
and it's like that was crucial. I mean, and to say that the police recovered this evidence from some other kind of means is ridiculous. And that I will stand by. I can't say, like, anything other than DeFeo telling the investigators where to find these items. There's no other explanation how that evidence was recovered, in
Right.
my opinion.
And this is exactly why I wanted you on my airwaves, because like I told the audience before you came on, I really feel that we're kindred spirits in true crime, because I have run into the same exact phenomenon in the Son of Sam world, where we have David Berkowitz himself telling details of the crimes that were forensically accurate according to the actual police reports. We have him saying, for instance, in the Carl Denaro shooting, for instance, where Carl Denaro to this day believes that he was shot by a woman because the bullets were wild, the shots were wild. Berkowitz himself answered that very question in 1979. He said, "Oh, in the first couple shootings, I was only using one hand because I was very unsure of this. So in the Gennaro shooting, the bullets went everywhere." And still to this day, people, it's like you're touching a religion. You know what I'm saying? And people cannot handle these very objective facts. And this is where I believe all true crime, especially in these big cases, has to go. We have to just deal with the facts that we have. And in the case of DeFeo, the DeFeos, yeah, what would be the motivation for the cops to lie? There actually, if you think about it logically, there wouldn't be any.
There
So
wouldn't be. They have nothing to gain by lying. Now, let's be transparent here. The Suffolk County Police Department did have a pretty bad reputation, as far as maybe misrepresenting facts in police reports, to roughing up some individuals to get a confession. These weren't angels. This was a time, New York. There was a time when New York City Police Department was very corrupt. I mean, just
right,
watch the movies like Serpico.
of course,
You had cops who were on the take. Because they weren't making enough doing their job, and I think some of that bled into Long Island. It's not the city, but
oh, no doubt. Corruption is rampant even to this day, and corruption was insane back then. But again,
right,
it's like, what's the motivation for forensic scientists, medical examiners, homicide
right.
investigators to be faking their stories? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it depends whose narrative you want to believe. Like, you could have me and two other, I hate to call us investigators, because we're not really investigators, but like storytellers.
Hmm.
People who have written books about this case, who might have a completely different perspective than I do, who might think that there was more people involved in the actual murders, and we all probably could say a thing or two that we'd agree upon, or things that are just so opposite of what each other is trying to convey in their discussion here. I like to stick to the facts. Look, these shows like Dateline and 48 Hours, right? Two very popular true crime shows. People keep watching those shows because they want the truth, right? You
Right.
want to see how it ends. You're going to invest 2 hours of your time sitting there going through all the commercial breaks just to get to the end, right? You want to see what happened. And it's always the same ending, right? It's always
Right.
someone's going to prison.
Right.
you know
Right.
so
Now,
so
go ahead.
yeah. No, so I was just saying, in this case is no different. The DeFeo case was no different, other than the fact that the whole paranormal side of it really got heated up once the Lutz family became involved. And William Weber, the defense attorney for DeFeo, I think saw an opportunity to make some cash, and he tried to get that relationship between the Lutzes and DeFeo, on one page, so they could all profit and make some money. And it's that book deal I know fell through with Weber, and there was lawsuits back and forth.
Right.
But
Well, that was
yeah,
another,
so
yeah, I mean, that's another interesting aspect of this, that the
sure,
defense lawyer for DeFeo, William Weber, was working with the Lutzes. And we're not terribly interested in that story here, going down the rabbit hole of that story. Maybe that's for
Right.
another day. But there just seems to be a lot of characters around these big crimes, as I call them, that are very unscrupulous, seeming only they want money or attention or fame. And that is the death knell of true crime, of true crime, is what I call it. And interestingly enough, even David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, Rob, even he had an opinion on the Amityville horror. So
Mhm.
this is, of course, from letters that he sent to his psychiatrist, which I have done the world's deepest dive into these letters that have ever been done on my series called Psychiatric Sunday. And here he is in his own handwriting and typing here. Oh, well, time for something a little more pleasant. Did you hear about the former DeFeo Lutz residence? It has been purchased for the bargain price of $80,000 by a psychic researcher from Arizona. He said that he wanted to see for himself if the story was true. He claims to be a professional investigator in the field of psychic phenomenon in his research. He moved in lock, stock, and barrel and says he can't wait to spend his first night in the house. D, either two things are going to happen. He will either say the house is haunted or it isn't. If he says it isn't, then I won't be surprised. So even David Berkowitz knew it was BS, Rob. However, if he
Mhm.
says it is, then again, I won't be surprised either. He seems like a quack and a charlatan, and I have a feeling that this may turn into a case of collusion. It may very well turn into a big publicity event stunt. I wouldn't put this past the movie company. I had tried to save the article, but someone took the newspaper. Sorry. So even the son of Sam himself kind of knew that they were turning this into a big media circus. And I don't know. To me, that's kind of instructive for
Right.
people out there who still might believe this.
Mhm. Certainly. Yeah,
So
it's just it goes. The wheels keep turning, man. And Hollywood loves it. They keep pumping out. Look, they made a remake in the 2000s, right, of the Amityville horror, and you know, think of all the fan films that are being pumped out on social media nowadays, right, with the
right,
name
right,
Amityville. It's just people just they love their ghost stories. They love the idea of, yeah, this could have happened. I think people now are becoming a little bit more I don't want to say intelligent. I don't want to,
no, no, no.
insult anyone, but they're a little bit more. Yeah,
They're savvy. They're savvier.
they're just they're savvy. They're skeptical. They know how to kind of read between the lines and say, yeah, I get why people are pushing this theory of these voices told DeFeo to kill. There's been so many interviews that he's given over the years, that he said, look, there were no voices in my head telling me to kill my family. His story has changed probably 5 or 6
Yeah,
times, right? As to his either his full involvement, to passing the buck to someone else, to him just being a spectator watching his family be slaughtered.
right.
It's just, look, he said the Butch DeFeo said a couple of things that really just ring true. And that is, I didn't care who they blamed as long as it wasn't me. That's what you can watch him say it online. Words come out of his mouth. Those
Right,
aren't words someone made up. He
right.
said it. He also said during his interrogation, once I started, I couldn't stop. It went so fast. I couldn't stop. Something to that
Wow.
effect.
And that actually does ring true. And of course, from what little research I've done into this, it seems like he has blamed two different cast of characters. The first story that he has is that he blamed his sister Dawn for killing the kids. He always said that he killed the mother and father, and then he killed Dawn. And then, of course, there's this whole notion of the football star, this guy named Bobby Kelsky, who was there that night as well. And then they investigated that and found no substance to it. I mean, Butch DeFeo, to me, I've met people like him. I mean, not murderers, but people with that similar vibe. He's just seems to me to be the biggest BS artist on the planet, Rob.
Yeah, he's if you watch interviews with him from when he was a little bit younger up until his last interview that I found from about 9 years back, he's just all over the place. I mean, he you got to remember, this guy is heavily medicated in prison when he was there. He was an opiate abuser.
Right.
Um, not the healthiest of individuals. So he, you just watch him, and he just, he's just all over the place. Like
Right.
you could interview him for 2 hours, and his story will slightly change. Like
Right.
he'll add things, take out things. He'll make almost self-incriminating statements, but then he'll pull back. So it's like, you almost want to say, okay, which Ronnie DeFeo am I getting today? Who are
Right.
you
And
blaming?
it seems to be who's interviewing him, just like David Berkowitz. He kind of tells people what they seemingly what they want to hear. Although he has a lot more violence in him than David Berkowitz had in terms of being interviewed. Berkowitz always, who I call Disco Dave, long story there. But he always seems to be very passive in his interviews, where Butch comes off as very confrontational. You can see the murderer in him. Whereas with David, it's not quite so apparent. So what do you, before we get into your great project that you're undertaking, your film work, which I definitely want you to talk to the audience about as much as you want, what do you think happened, and how did that notion of what you think actually happened, how did that then lead you into doing your film project on this?
Well, what I think happened about the case in particular, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, what's your notion of, take all the noise out of it,
Mm.
in Rob Levinson's opinion, based
Yeah.
on your research, what happened that night, November 13th, 1974?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind, at least, just from hearing witnesses who knew the family, that Big Ronnie was an abusive husband, an abusive father, primarily to his son Butch and somewhat to his daughter Dawn. It's my understanding that the younger children did not have to suffer, physical confrontations
Mhm.
with their dad for the most part. But they were all intimidated by this man, this giant of a man.
Yeah, I mean, he
And
looks like a bruiser. This guy does not look like a man you wanna
now,
mess with at all.
yeah, he looks like he's got a short fuse, probably wears many faces, many masks, I'm sure. But anyhow, I think that there's reasonableness. I hate to say it, but this reasonableness for Butch to hate his father, maybe even his mother, because it seems as if the mother did not do enough to try to stop any of the physical abuse. But she was also a victim of a physical abuse. So, it's tough for her to stand up for her kids if she can't stand up for herself.
Right, and it's also the '70s. I mean, it was a very
The
different time period.
70s, right? It was, I think, domestic violence of that kind was almost accepted. I think in some police departments they would just tell the guy to walk it off, right, and come back in
Right,
an
right,
hour.
exactly.
Yeah.
It was not
Right. Yeah.
considered as big a deal as it is now.
Right. So I think between the physical abuse, the intimidation, the fact that Butch was using LSD, he was a heroin user. He was a fairly frequent user of heroin and alcohol. All of these things, not cocaine. He was very into these depressants. These types of you know drugs, these illicit drugs that calm you down, make you high. I think he was trying to escape his reality, and but he was also a hothead. He got into fights. He just got kicked out of schools when he was younger. So I think that this all culminated in this deep hatred for his father, and uh, I think one night he had enough. Um, and from what I understand, there was an altercation between his father over some stolen money, checks from the business. Uh, just a couple of
Yes,
weeks before.
I did find an article in the New York Times
Right,
about that. It was about $19,000 stolen from, the Brigante Buick dealership, and it just
right,
reeked of inside job to me, like
correct.
something out of
Yeah. So
Goodfellas.
right, but this is the intelligence of Butch DeFeo. He and another employee, a couple of blocks away, get robbed during the daytime, of their deposit bag. But then immediately thereafter, Butch starts buying himself expensive clothes and all this stuff, and the
Yeah.
father's like, hey, how you affording all this stuff? I mean, granted, Butch got an allowance from his dad, but still, I guess the things that he was purchasing were pretty expensive. And he accused them. He says, I know you did this. I know you were behind this. And that got into a vicious argument, a physical confrontation. And so all these things, all these things. And, then there was what's the motive? What's the motive? What did Butch DeFeo think he was going to get out of this? And, it was discovered that there was a $200,000 life insurance policy that the father had. And, motive there, if I kill all my siblings, guess what? We don't have to split the money. The money goes back to me.
It's
And there's
classic
something,
motive.
yeah, it's a classic motive of a dimwit, because
Yeah.
there's a very good book that, many, I'm sure, Amityville fans have read. It's called High Hopes, by Gerard Sullivan. And it was written about 6 years after the trial. And in there, he mentions that, part of the motive was this life insurance policy and some money that was hidden, in the house itself. And that this was his motive. This was, he thought that he would, walk away with some money in his pocket and not have to deal with his father. I don't know how clear-minded he could have been that night, because
Very unclear, because yeah,
yeah,
you're not going to get away with that.
right, to kill your brothers and your sisters the way he did. I don't know how he could have gotten through that. But anyhow, he even said in the book High Hopes, there's a passage in there where after he's made his oral confession, he says to one of the detectives, so do you think that means I won't be able to get the insurance money?
I mean, it's right
So,
there.
if you want to say, okay, that's not true, he didn't say that, okay, I can't argue. It's in the book. You have people who testify to that, that was what he said. Back then, I'm sure they didn't do many tape recordings of interviews. It wasn't as common as it is, obviously now. But I found that statement to be very interesting. It really just shows you what his level of intelligence was.
Right. I mean, he
Fortunately.
just seems like a guy just burnt at, probably not that intelligent to begin with, as you can see from his, his demeanor and his the way he is on these interviews. But yeah, then blown out by drugs and LSD and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, Forensic Files, when you watch that show Forensic Files, it's just littered with stories just like this. I think the main thing was that Long Island had never seen something like this before. Suffolk County had never experienced anything like this. Amityville never. So that's what made it such a huge case, of course.
Sure. And it would have been interesting if they could have done a blood sample on him right away, right? To
Right.
search for whatever barbiturates were in his system, how much alcohol was in his system. Granted, the alcohol, I mean, these levels would have dissipated, because by the time, he was in custody, it was several hours,
Right.
after the murders,
Now, one thing I
so
want to speak to, because again, I want to always be fair to as a journalist and as as a researcher. I want to be fair to some people who might be into the notion of Dawn, the sister, being involved.
sure.
Now, I know that you don't believe it, and from what little research I've done, I don't believe it either. But there's this whole notion that people use that she had gunpowder residue on her
Yeah.
whatever, her robe.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, sure. I mean, that was already debunked when that all came to light. Uh, that was more, you know, sauce on the spaghetti there for Ronald DeFeo, saying, "Hey, look, they even found unburnt gunpowder on my sister's nightgown. That means she could have fired a weapon." Well, you know, experts say no, that's not the case. If someone is shot at close range, well then gunpowder residue there's going to be a transfer of evidence that goes on to the person you're aiming a weapon at. So there's just nothing for me there to believe that she was involved. Do I she despised her dad? Sure. I know there's this theory that she had this boyfriend in Florida, this older boyfriend. I mean, it's not a theory; he did exist. That
Right.
she wanted to move to Florida to be with him, and the father said, "Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere." Do I think that was motive enough for her to allegedly be involved with killing the parents and then slaughtering her siblings and then just telling Butch I had to do it because they would have told the police? It just sounds
Right.
so like look what a child would say, if they're
Right.
like, it
Right.
just doesn't make any sense. How many
Now,
how many women mass murderers do we know of?
it's true. It's right. Exactly. I mean, again, it's we have to suspend so much disbelief in order to believe these various theories. And if you had spoken to me 2 years ago, before I went through my buzzsaw of Son of Sam, in a sense, having to deal with, well, what's really, in my opinion, one of the craziest true crime communities out there in terms of the people who still believe in the cult theory. The most of the world came with me and realized that we were colossally hoaxed. But it's not pleasant to deal with these people, but we just have to, as researchers, in my opinion, deal soberly with the facts. Now, one other question that I have about these crimes that's a mystery, and maybe you can speak to it, is the lack of movement by the kids. They just waited for someone to come in and shoot them. Are there any
Well,
thoughts that you have about that?
a couple of thoughts. I'm not 100% necessarily, in support of there wasn't someone else in the house. Is it possible that there could have been one of his bar friends in there at the time? Could there have been someone there, keeping the kids in their bedroom, keeping them calm, telling them everything's okay, just stay in your beds as Butch went from room to room killing people? Sure. I mean, I can't rule that out because that is plausible. The other thing is, especially with younger kids, that maybe they were frozen in fear.
Right.
Sometimes you hear a noise. You hear a noise when you're little. Like I can remember being scared. In the middle of the night, if I heard a noise, I was too scared to get out of bed. You
Absolutely.
know,
I've been there too.
right. So I think everyone can relate to that. So that's a possibility. I mean, I can't. I don't think I could go in here and say, well, maybe they were just heavy sleepers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
That's
I doubt that was it. So I guess that's something even the prosecutor, Gerard Sullivan, said that's the one thing that troubled him the most
right.
about this, even though, the case was successful. Um, why didn't any of those kids try to escape from the house or hide?
Exactly.
Why
And
weren't they
that's
like found somewhere else?
right, like hiding in the basement in a corner
Right.
somewhere. Yeah, absolutely. But as Linda DB said, and which I can attest to, well, I've never been chased by someone shooting a gun, but fear could be a definite factor, especially if there's prior abuse in the house. 'Cause apparently, all these children were abused. So, I mean, there are things in true crime which will forever remain mysteries. But one of the things that I like to say is the forensic evidence doesn't lie. And most of the time, homicide detectives and medical examiners have absolutely no reason to lie either. So this
Correct.
actually segues us into now that you bring up Gerard Sullivan, this actually segues us into the next and final segment of this interview today. And of course, Rob, I thank you so much for being here today, and the audience is loving it.
But,
We got how many people watching? 86
oh,
people
really?
watching now. So
Okay.
that's a fantastic response, and I have a feeling this one is going to go far and wide. So your movie, before we get into the hows, whys, wheres, and all those things, why don't we show the audience a 2.5 minute trailer of your proof of concept of your movie entitled Amityville: The People of New York versus Ronald J DeFeo Jr. So we'll just link to that right now, and we'll watch that.
What's upstairs is far from common. I've never seen anything like this before.
Police combed the DeFeo's handsome three-story house for the still unfound murder weapon. Police have been questioning the son, Ronald, There's 6 members of the family dead, and he's the sole remaining member. He's not a suspect at this time.
So much for living in Sleepy Hollow. I know. You all right?
Bobby told me everything.
You called him a cocksucker a few years back, and he just decides to wipe out your entire family. You end up completely untouched.
Yeah. I guess I got lucky. We need to find and clear this Tony Mazzio.
You and I both know our dude is sitting right in there.
You have the right to remain silent.
This is gonna be easier if you're honest with us. These questions we're asking you, we already know the answers to.
Ronald DeFeo Jr. is guilty of 6 separate crimes of second-degree murder, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Burden of proof in any criminal trial rests solely on the prosecution.
We allow Weber a way in. I think that prick might be cunning enough to put holes in all of this.
They think they gave you DeFeo's head on a skewer. Proving this beyond a reasonable doubt, well, that's up to you, and you alone.
I barely see you as it is. Now you're taking on the most talked about case since Watergate.
Mr. Briganti, would you lie to protect your own flesh and blood?
I never lied in my life.
Do you think you can win?
Only one way to find out.
And I say you get that son of a bitch.
Recall telling any of Mr. DeFeo's friends that if Mr. DeFeo had given you the gun, you'd have hidden it for him.
I don't recall saying that at all, sir.
Do they look like it's out of sync?
Or are they your clothes?
It's out of sync.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's looking okay over on my end.
Not over here.
We'll deal. Whoa. Excellent. Great production values. I'm liking that, Rob. I'm liking that a lot. So, real quick, we just didn't get the end credits here. So everybody can check that out if you just go onto YouTube and look for that. So talk to us about this project. What was the inspiration of it? And, tell us about, the making of it and what your plans are.
Sure. Yeah. So like I said at the beginning of the interview, I like you and other people, I was a huge fan of the Amityville movie. Really stuck with me as a young person and through my teens. And once I started writing, I entertained the possibility of trying to write a script based on a true story, something I've never attempted to do before. But I just put it off. And then once I realized I had something to tell, a story that was worth exploring, I started doing my research and decided to pick a side. And my side, in my opinion, is the facts of the case, the investigation.
That's why I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Not the conjecture, not paranormal, nothing that people could say, well, if you don't believe in ghosts or paranormal, then how can you tell this story? Well, I'm not telling that side of the story because as far as I'm concerned, that had nothing to do with the DeFeo massacre. This was a family, a very highly dysfunctional family. That's what was the root of this issue, of this household discord turned into violence and continued violence and drug abuse and alcohol abuse. All of these elements are the ingredients for a disaster. Eventually, someone's going to die. In this case, 6 people died. And it didn't have to happen. It's too bad. It's unfortunate that other family members didn't intervene. You think about, nowadays with something like, yes, these crimes nowadays still do happen. You still hear on the news how, murder suicides are always happening, right? So, it's just, we live in a violent culture, whether it's this country or other countries. We can debate, gun rights all we want, I guess, but that's another story. So this story in my heart had to be based on the facts that I perceive to be true, not saying that this is a a documentary. That was never my intention. As you can see from the trailer, it's not a documentary, it's a narrative film. We have actors portraying these real life people. Every actor that you saw in the trailer and that people could see in the entire proof of concept, they are based on real people. Most of them are no longer here. And trying to bring their voice out so people can hear their words. Obviously, this is a narrative film, so there is my perspective on things. There's also the creative liberties that writers will take when they write a script based on true events, and that's what this is. It's based on true events, not based on a true story. There's a difference.
Right.
So people who watch this, and there's always those people out there who want to challenge you.
Yeah,
you
nitpick
know,
every little
or
yeah.
nitpick, which whatever. If that's your thing, okay. There's some people that just want to bait you into an argument. I haven't
Tell me
had
about
too much. Right, and you've experienced way more than I have.
Way
but
more.
I'm sure that those days are coming. If and when more steam picks up about this project of mine. So I started writing the script, and earlier this year in January, I started banging it out, and it was flowing pretty good. And then I said, I'd like to focus on a proof of concept. Let me stop here and see where I could jump around this story that's in my mind. And,
now, for real quick, what's the definition of a proof of concept?
Okay, sure. A proof of concept can be anything from several minutes to generally several minutes. I mean, mine is 31 minutes. That's a little bit on the longer end. Most proof of concepts are probably under 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I really went full throttle here because I thought that there was a lot of information that I needed to get on film, so people would be extremely interested in seeing this become a feature film, like a full 2-hour movie.
Right.
So I did my job. I hopefully I did my job. I did it as well as I could do it. At least, are there things I wished I could go back? When you watch things as a filmmaker, you always see things you wish you could change, and this is no exception.
Right.
But I knew that I had a limited amount of time to get the coverage I needed, because every day on set is such a financial crunch to have to bear. And I'm just a regular guy. I work, a 40-hour week job. So it's like, I'm not being paid or compensated by a studio. So, finding the right people to help you tell your story is crucial. So, I had a wonderful cinematographer, Jeffrey Bassett, who you see there in the pictures. And who else? You see Joel Cox in the background to his right. You see my actors. You see Mark Powers in the background. He's a detective. You see Ethan Rogers, who portrays Ronald DeFeo. Amazing. Just wonderful.
Yeah, in fact,
people.
you sent me this because I was like, wait a second, that doesn't look like the DeFeo that I know. And then you sent me this article here, where in fact, you nailed it, man.
Yeah. So like when he went to trial, his attorney said, "Hey, shave the beard, and look a little bit more dignified when you go to court." So in the top part of that picture you're showing, the top photograph is DeFeo, and the bottom is Ethan Rogers, and we came pretty damn close, I think.
Yeah, you really did.
And
down to even
the hair is perfect.
Well, the hair and the suit is great too.
The suit,
where'd you get that suit? Hold on.
I found the jacket on, I think, eBay, and I bought it for like $30.
That's great.
The shirt he provided, but yeah, I mean, it's just trying to be as authentic as I could within my budget was paramount. I didn't want to shortchange the audience, but I also couldn't mortgage my house to make the movie either. I'm not as ambitious as Francis Ford Coppola, but but I was very lucky, extremely lucky with this one, because I found so many kind individuals that allowed me to film it, like in this room that you're showing. This was a former courthouse in Rhode Island, which is now used as a as a local politics type town hall sort of thing. But they kept it pretty much as authentic as it was when it was built.
And you chose to tell the story from actually a very interesting perspective, and one that I never would have thought of. You chose to tell the story from the viewpoint of the prosecutor, this guy named Gerard Sullivan, who, strangely enough, seems to be a ghost in terms of information about him, probably because he died in, 1991. But why'd you choose to go that route?
Well, when I read his book, I thought, was a procedural book. It was pretty much told in chronological order as the events unfolded and how he became involved in the case. He was a younger prosecutor at the time, working at the DA's office, and he was roughly 33 years old, had a wife and 2 young children, and just moved into this bigger house, was really enjoying his life. He was an avid sailor, scuba diver, piano player. I mean, he was just a very fulfilled individual. And he saw this case as an opportunity. I don't criticize him for that.
I don't either.
He saw an opportunity to be part of this high-profile case. He was confident in his abilities as a prosecutor, young but still seasoned enough in his mind to handle this case. And he maneuvered his way. He originally was not assigned to the case. A more seasoned attorney was, but he was also on the verge of retiring, this other attorney, and he conveniently schmoozed them and said, hey, why don't you take this case? Because this is not as heavily involved. And, this case could take years, and you don't have years left on the job. So, the head of the district attorney's office, granted the switch. And, from there, Mr. Sullivan ran with it. And he believed heavily that just because DeFeo was indicted and he was going to trial did not mean the investigation ended there. Okay, yes, they had enough probable cause to charge him, but what else do we need to secure a conviction? Especially if this goes before a jury, right? So he worked extensively with the lead investigators. Lieutenant Robert Dunn was one of them. And Dennis Rafferty, Detective Dennis Rafferty, who got the confession out of Butch when he was interrogated. So these guys, they were still working on this case pretty much right up until it went to trial about 11 months later, which is fast. Nowadays murder trials can linger, right? It could take you 3 years sometimes in our system before you go before a court. Because there's so many motions and
Now, one question about the timeline there. Did this trial happen before all the paranormal stuff came out, or were they happening at the same time?
Almost simultaneously, almost.
Interesting.
Because not quite. It was just there like the trial ended in December. Okay, it began in October and ended in December. I forgot the exact date. Sorry, people.
Sorry.
But anyhow, it's easy enough to research that part.
Yeah.
So the Lutz family, they were living in the house at that time period. They hadn't fled the house yet. So yes, if you believe what the Lutzes were experiencing, they were going through all that while the trial was happening.
Or
coming to
they
an
were
end.
just right, or they were just amazing opportunists and realized that there was a trial going on, right? I mean, that's a very interesting overlap there. I mean, it's actually another piece of evidence to me that these Lutzes were just total sham artists. But maybe we'll have another interview on that one day. But so you decided to tell the story from Sullivan's perspective, which is interesting. And of course, Sullivan now is emerging as an interesting character because he was a very good looking guy, as you say, very proactive. And you got to wonder, like, if part of his ambition, you got to wonder if some of these prosecutors are just frustrated performers. You know what I mean? Frustrated artists, musicians, actors.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, think about how many prosecutors later go on to write books and do book tours, and they have to be charismatic. They have to get your attention because they want to make money on their books. And once again, I don't disparage anyone who tries to make a living doing writing books or making movies. I mean,
Of course.
it's an art form, and either you can do it or you can't, or you keep trying, like I do. I keep trying. So, but with Mr. Sullivan, I respected his drive. I know some people have said that he wasn't maybe as honest, or didn't play by the rules all the time, and maybe he didn't. But do I think he was as bad as the person he was trying to get convicted? Certainly not.
Right.
I'm not saying you should be breaking rules left and right and violating people's rights to get to a conviction. Of course not. And I don't think that line was ever crossed.
Actually, that's something that really bothered me about Maury Terry's work with Son of Sam, was that he turned David Berkowitz into a victim. He turned this mass murderer, this spree killer, into a victim of the forces around him, and he had no control. And that always bothers me. And they didn't. And it almost seemed like they tried to do that with Butch DeFeo as well, by fobbing it all off on this.
You have to remember that Butch actually went through a few defense attorneys before he landed William Weber. In fact, one defense attorney he physically attacked. So I mean, it's just like and William Weber, to his credit, was a smart attorney, and he tried to do his job here to the best of his abilities. But I think he realized that once he had all the discovery from the prosecution, he realized that, my client's in some trouble here. None of it's making any sense other than the fact that he murdered his family. So what do? I'm going to have him, plead insanity and try to act as, I'm going to put him on the stand, and I'm going to have him testify on his own behalf, which was a nightmare, which was like the worst thing a defense attorney could do.
Stupidest, yeah.
But sometimes the defendants will want to, as a last-ditch attempt, to tell their side of the story, or try to convince the jury that their story is true and the allegations aren't. So so some of the clips that I put into the proof of concept, this one in particular, that people are saying, well, why did you show that clip? Isn't that sort of spoiling the ending? Where William Weber says to him, Butch, did you kill your family? And he says, well, yeah, I had to. It was self-defense. I killed them all.
Right.
Yeah, you killed. Right. So
Little
it's like,
kids,
but that's right. But that's not giving anything away.
No.
It's there. It's already been written about. We know that granted, yes, there are people who might not know anything about the story. And of course, those are the people I want to appeal to. But there's so much more that we're going to see. Hopefully the film does get made, that goes beyond him blurting out those statements. It's more important for me as a filmmaker and a storyteller to show all of the parts of this that went into getting him convicted. Okay, it was more than just him standing, being on the stand and making outlandish statements and acting crazy. It had to do with the investigation and the quality of the testimony. Now, I know there are people out there that will say some of these cops perjured themselves under oath.
There are always going to be people who say that.
And that Butch was forced, coerced into confessing. And I don't know how to speak to that. It's just that's where you're coming. If that's where you're coming from, and you honestly believe that Butch was not, the prime suspect here, then I don't know, man. How do I try to convince you differently?
You can't.
I'm telling a story. I'm not trying to tell every single iota of this. This isn't being told from Ronald DeFeo's perspective. This is being told from the prosecution perspective. If someone wants to write a story and make a movie about his perspective, go for it. I don't believe his perspective. I think anyone who watches any of his interviews will probably say this guy's all over the place. You know, he's just
absolutely.
He's changed so many times. How can you make a plausible story out of this and convince an audience to feel what you're feeling as the filmmaker? So
you can't, and that's why I really believe that you did a great service to not only the Amityville story, but to true crime in general, because it's just another part of what I call the new zeitgeist, which is getting this conspiracy crap out, forming opinions, sticking to them, but those opinions should be based on actual forensic evidence. So yeah.
It's extremely dangerous, you know, conspiracy theories, because I mean, think about, I mean, not to get off the subject of Amityville, but think about what's happening in this country, you know, with whether, I don't want to get into, you know, which party you're affiliated with, but you think about the conspiracy theories, the election fraud, and people who are, well, it was fraud, but you know, what are you basing that statement upon? You know, I mean, you go back and forth. I mean, you could attack one another, but it's these conspiracy theories, and you think of, you know, I don't want to even say his name on your show, but you know, with the Newtown, you know, shooting in Connecticut, where all those, it's just, you think about those situations and how people believed that that was a hoax.
Right.
You know, that, you know, it's funny what people will believe is a hoax and what they believe is true. So you look at that, you look at all those children and teachers that were murdered, right? And people say that didn't really happen. Those were actors. Those kids are still alive somewhere. But then they believe George and Kathy Lutz were victims of this paranormal experience, and you know, everything they said is the gospel.
The gospel truth.
Right. So it's the human mind is very curious, you know.
You really see it when you touch on what I call these cultic religions of true crime. And in Son of Sam, my experience has been with the people who still believe in the cult theory. And there's no arguing with them. No matter what you do, it always comes back to the circular argument of, well, Maury Terry wrote it in a book, and in your case, well, Jay Anson wrote it in a book. And my attitude is, at this point, well, afangul on you. There's nothing I can do to help you or to educate you. So you know what? Believe what you want. I'm going to move on in my life, and that's kind of where I'm at, Rob. So Rob, hey. Yeah. So Rob, excellent interview today. I want to say thank you so much. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to tell the audience? Why don't you let them know how they can find you online?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I just, you know, before I leave you guys, I want people to know that when they do sit down to watch the proof of concept, you know, this is still a movie, that there are character arcs, story arcs here that are based on a possibility. You know, as a writer, you try to take elements of the truth, and you also try to add elements of creativity. So when depicting Gerard Sullivan in his personal life with his spouse and kids, you know, these are just creative liberties we take as writers. Right. So without knowing for sure what his home life was like, how this tragic case affected his personal life, well, that's where the movie making side kicks in. So I just want people to understand that when they're going in and they're watching this, it's just, we want to entertain, but we also want to educate at the same time.
Right. You're not doing a documentary, you're doing a movie, which is an important distinction to make. So where can people find you online?
They can find me Out of Time Pictures on Facebook. I have a website, Out of Time Pictures. They can go there. I'm on Instagram, Out of Time Pictures. The film has their own Amityville, The People of New York versus Ronald J DeFeo Jr. is also, there's a group people can join on Facebook. I encourage, we're over 700 strong and growing. People should definitely come there for updates, and also on Instagram, I'm there too. So.
Excellent. Well, Rob, on behalf of my audience, I want to say thank you so much. Why don't you hang out just off stage while I just see the audience on out? We really appreciate your time. No, you're very welcome, and we really appreciate your time. And just know that you have a friend in us here at Son of Sam Truth. And if you ever have any updates or anything that you want to tell us, well, I'll be glad to set up another interview with you where we could take it out to the world.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome, Rob. Please just hang out for a minute or two. All right, guys. Well, that was great. Very, very happy that we did that. Very happy that we're branching out into these other crimes, which touch upon what we just did the last 2 years, which was getting conspiracy theory out of true crime. It does not belong there. There are real people committing real crimes, and there are real investigators with real forensic evidence. And listen, it's the golden age, guys. We have so much more information at our fingertips than we ever had before. If anybody wants to argue, hey, that's fine. But people like Rob, myself, we're out here trying to tell the real stories, and we hope that that came across to you today. So on behalf of Rob, and of course, on behalf of our fantastic audience out there, I want to say thank you so much, and we will see you at the next live stream. Thank you, guys. Take care.